Welcome, CLC. I'm Naomi Fada. Thank you so much for joining me here this evening. As you know, we've been working our way through my book, Stitching Your Story, piece by piece, and we are on week 8, and this is all about overwhelm. And this is such a reminder to me all the time because it's, often people will say to me, "Why you seem like you have it all together," and little do they know how much overwhelm I struggle with. So hopefully in this chapter, I was able to clearly verbalize that, put it into some words. But right, there's overwhelm is maybe part of all of our lives in some way, shape, or form. And I know that I can quickly go from feeling peaceful to feeling overwhelmed, like in so far over my head that I don't even feel like I can breathe anymore, right? Because all the weight of that comes down on us. And of course, when I started the chapter of the week with talking about just how all these things in our lives feels like playing Tetris, right? Maybe you can relate, whatever the things are that you have, the responsibilities, and how do we break that down? And really coming to God and saying, where are you in this overwhelm? And the passage that really spoke to me about this that I put on page 118 was from the life of Moses. And he says, Moses said to the Lord, "You've been telling me lead these people, but you have not let me know whom you will send with me. You have said, I know you by name, and you have found favor with me. If you are pleased with me, teach me your ways so I may know you and continue to find favor with you. Remember that this nation is your people." And the Lord replied, "My presence will go with you, and I will give you rest." And I personally found that such a promise, such a hope, like his presence will go with us and give us rest, give me rest. And how can I find that? I'm in the midst of overwhelm. So then when I think of overwhelm, I think, oh, I have too much on my plate. And where does that stem from? So breaking it down into, one of the days is really more about that people pleasing of helping. And does their stress or anxiety or their emergency become my emergency? And how do we set a sort of a boundary around that? And for sure, whether it's not just business, but whether it's church or something where maybe you've been asked to fill in a spot, teaching a class, leading a ministry, serving in an area. There's all these variety of areas that we might feel really overwhelmed. And sometimes it's because we've said yes to something that we shouldn't be saying yes to, or an emergency that wasn't our emergency to solve. And sometimes right when we step into filling in for somebody's emergency, maybe we're enabling their irresponsible behavior. For an example, like if I step into somebody's prom emergency and say, right, I'm going to solve this for you in 4 days, yet their irresponsibility was that they waited until a week before prom to get a dress. It's allowing them to continue on in that lateness or the lack of foresight and planning for events. And so then in essence, I enable them to believe that there will always be someone to save them. And that's just a very minor instance, but maybe there's other instances where, you can think about whether it's a family issue or a work issue or a church issue. We have all these relationships in our lives, and how other times when we save people that it creates an emergency for us, and that's really not what God intended. And, another thing that I really address is margin. And I used to talk about this as white space on my calendar in terms of saying, well, where are blocks of time where I don't have anything? I don't have a responsibility. I don't have commitments. I have time where I rest and I recharge. And so not filling every single slot of time. And I think that is something that over time I've learned. It's still a work in progress. In fact, as I enter into the season with teenagers needing to be driven back and forth places, I find that this margin is, it's different. It's looking different. And so where can I find my margin in that? Even, this evening I have to drive half an hour each way to pick up my son. And that feels like, oh, a whole hour of time just because he had an activity. But maybe my margin is, okay, I'm going to use that time to find rest for my soul as I'm driving that half an hour. There's things that, in the season of life, asking God, well, what is it that you have for me? And how can I find margin, or can I find rest even in the season that I'm in? And one of the other really key things that I think about for overwhelm is really defining, spending time on what is it that God has called me to do? What are the things that He has specifically put on my heart to do? Maybe an area of service, maybe part of your work, part of your family. What areas do you feel like He's called you to be faithful with? And kind of circling those as like, this is what I'm committed to. And I know that I need to give a certain amount of time to that. And so when I say yes to something else, recognizing that it's going to take away from maybe those things that I feel more deeply called to, and creating, space around them and being willing to say no when we know that, oh, if I say yes to that, it's going to be another thing on my plate and I'm not going to have as much time for what I feel called to do, feel that God has called me to do. And so it's all this process, this work and process as we, work with God to learn who He created us to be, the vision that He has for our lives, our families, and the things that we're involved in. And recognizing that really when we say yes to too many things, when we don't have some margin or some boundaries around our time, it's a real issue of anxiety, of where that anxiety, that stress can come in and be so powerful that, it begins to kind of control our thinking and our inner life with God. And that's not what He wants for us. So those are just a couple of thoughts that I have for you this week. So God bless you, and look forward to seeing you next week. If you'd like to find out more about Community Life Church, you can find us online at clchurch.cc, also on Facebook and Instagram. Join us on a Sunday, 10:30. We would love to see you there.